The generation that lived through World War I is gone, and the last surviving veterans have died. But their memories live on in a remarkable project that recorded their stories on film.
Young people like myself are saying, we'll show those Germans, we'll push them back home.
Everywhere you went, a great big posters up of Kitchener. His finger seemed to be pointing at your king and country need you.
In this series, those who were there tell the story of the war in their own words.
You've got no feelings of humanity. Right then. Afterwards, yes.
In this episode, the last great struggle on the Western Front in the months before the final breakthrough.
Hell was let loose with the Germans. The shrapnel machine guns playing on us. We hadn't a chance.
Whether you were going to shoot Germans or were they going to shoot you, you never knew what the future held.
These last veterans of World War I revealed their experiences in the hope that what they went through would never be forgotten. By 1917, Britain had been at war for 3 years, and yet the front line had barely moved. But this was to be the final year of Deadlock, the darkest hour before the dawn. It was dominated by 2 epic battles, one at Arras, the second in the mud swamps of Ypres. For a generation, that name became synonymous with sacrifice and slaughter on an inhuman scale. As 1917 began, morale was at rock bottom. Many men had lost not only friends and fellow soldiers, but their courage and patriotic spirit too. The weather didn't help. The previous winter had been one of the coldest on record. Freezing temperatures and years of trudging through the mud left many soldiers suffering from a debilitating condition that became known as trench foot. "19-year-old Cameron Highlander Andrew Bowie soon noticed the telltale signs.
The slump came on the instep off my left foot mainly. The right foot wasn't so bad. Came up about the size of a golf ball. Just dirt collecting, pus.
Andrew's foot became so blistered and swollen that he was sent to hospital. As he discovered, the treatment could be swift and brutal.
So the next day they came round and they had a look at it. The whole thing had burst open. And they said, "Oh, well, Jock," he says, "that saved us a big job." So they passed on, and I beckoned to the corporal. I says, "What do they mean by a big job?" He looked at his list. "Oh, your left leg was due for amputation below the knee."
Andrew's leg was saved, but many other soldiers were not so lucky. Thousands suffered amputations. Ambulances brought a constant stream of sick, wounded and dying soldiers to casualty clearing stations. Unqualified staff were left to dress wounds and even anaesthetize patients. Overworked surgeons and nurses operated around the clock. Volunteer nurse Marjorie Grigsby from Portsmouth found the conditions shocking.
Hell. Absolute hell. We were doing things we knew nothing about, giving injections to people with legs hanging out of trousers, heads half blown off, and using the same needle just dipped in carbolic 20. Just one after another. We didn't really know what we were doing. All we were anxious to do was to put them out of their pain. It's an absolute medley, really, of blood and thunder. I remember once I said to one, have you got a mother and father? And he said, I haven't got a mother, she's dead. But I said to him, well, you'll be with her in a few minutes, so don't worry. And that was all I said to him. There wasn't anything else to say.
At the front itself, the German army tried a new tactic. It withdrew 40 miles to a newly fortified position, a network of vast bunkers and tunnels known as the Hindenburg Line. In their wake, they left villages devastated, roads and bridges destroyed, all to slow the Allied advance. Once they'd struggled through the rubble, the Allies had little choice. They had to attack the Hindenburg Line head. The men who faced this challenge were being joined by a new breed of soldier, the conscript. By now, all men between the ages of 18 and 41 had been called up for duty. Among them was a 19-year-old apprentice plumber from Somerset, Harry Patch.
I didn't want to go, but it was a case of had to. I lived a sheltered life, I suppose, and army life didn't appeal to me at all. I had no inclination to fight anybody. I mean, why should I go out and kill somebody I never knew? For what reason? There was no reason at all in it, in my way of thinking.
The Allies had a new tactic of their own. They were adding another dimension to their assault by taking to the skies. The idea caught the imagination of 19-year-old Bill Hall.
Well, first of all, of course, like we all did in those days, we saw the pictures of the soldiers in the trenches. Well, that wasn't for me. All the mud, up to their knees in mud, through the trenches, sleeping in all that mud. Yeah, and then when they had to go over the trenches and through the barbed wire and all that sort of thing, I didn't fancy that. But I thought a pilot, oh, that's lovely. I thought it was something really marvellous because it was very new in those days, piloting and flying. So I thought I'd try it.
Sidney James was also keen to be a pilot.
I was in the army to start, and then they asked for volunteers. And then I jumped at the opportunity, and I fancy flying, because if it did come down, it would be instant death. It was all a great game to me.
Within weeks, Britain's new fighter pilots had gained their wings. They soon found themselves joining the battle in the skies over Arras. In April 1917, British troops on the ground began to bombard a 12-mile stretch of the German lines. Meanwhile, pilots flew dangerously low to observe the German gun positions and help direct their colleagues' fire. Among them was 19-year-old Fred Taylor.
Suddenly, the whistle blew, and the boss shouts out, or the sergeant shouts out, "Number 5 gun, prepare for action." He calls out so-and-so, 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 numbers, right or left, and you turn the wheels and that sort of thing until the points, your gun's pointing in the right height and right width. And then suddenly he says, 2 rounds gunfire. Bang goes one, and you open the shell, put the bullet in, shut it, make sure it's on the right, woof, another one. And then he suddenly comes out, shouts out, "Number 5 gun? Excellent," he said, right in the middle of them. "Oh, thank you, sir. So, you've done your bit."
These reconnaissance missions in primitive machines were hazardous enough. But soon a far greater danger was to emerge, as Germany's famous fighter race, the Red Baron, took to the skies. In 1917, Germany's most celebrated fighter pilot arrived in Arras, determined to tip the balance of air power back to the Germans. His name? The Red Baron. Together with his crack squadron, Baron von Richthoven's red plane dominated the skies. Britain's airmen engaged in a life-and-death struggle with their German opponents. A pilot was lucky to survive more than 18 hours in action. But even as they lost friends and colleagues, the pilots had no time to grieve.
You lost a man, you wouldn't mention his name again, which was sensible. And so that was the only way. If you did, it'd all boil up. So you had to obliterate it.
In a single month, known as Bloody April, 245 British planes were lost. But even so, the Germans were unable to gain complete supremacy. British airmen continued their missions. On the ground, the Allies' spring campaign began on the 9th of April 1917. In the first 2 days, they made spectacular progress. Soldiers who had lost friends got their chance to even the score, like Tommy Thompson.
And that's when I say I fired the first time and only time I ever fired in anger. I'd fired, I think it must be 110 or 115 shots. And every single one was aimed at a German. And I picked them off one by one. I wish I knew how many I'd killed. I shouldn't be at all surprised it didn't go into 3 figures. I mean, to me, they weren't human beings, I wasn't shooting a man, I was just shooting an object.
But before long, it was back to deadlock. The two sides tried without success to wear each other down. By the end of the fighting at Arras, almost 160,000 British and Empire soldiers had been killed, around 4,000 men per day, the highest daily casualty rate of the war. The Germans had lost around 130,000 men. Just along the front line, a French offensive had ended in failure and revolt. 30,000 French troops left the line and refused to fight. As the British were left to shoulder the burden of the fighting, French deserters were executed. And Allied troops also faced the threat of the firing squad.
Well, you always had that in the back of your mind that if you were caught sleeping or refused to go over the top, well, then you knew what was coming. The fear of that drove a good many soldiers over the top. Yeah.
2 months later, fighting flared up again around the town of Ypres. Ypres was the key to the Channel ports, and vital Allied supply lines needed to be defended at all costs. To the north was the village of Passchendaele. Here, Harry Patch and the members of his light machine gun section were thrown into battle for the first time.
You were a team, and that was it. You were with them night and day. You shared everything with them, and you talked about everything. You could say it was more of a love than a comradeship, in a way.
As Harry and his friends faced the reality of combat, fear set in.
And if any man tells you he ever went to France and went in the front line, and tell you he wasn't scared, then he's a damn liar. I think every man that went in the front line at some time or another was scared. I know I was. And I know when it came to the point when we went into action, really, I was scared stiff, because I thought the first time over the top, you don't know how you're long going to live. That's it.
Andrew Bowie was part of the same push.
Yes, I think there was a atmosphere of nervousness went through the whole company, really. You felt that, will this be the last time? You know, you've always had that in mind. It didn't matter how strong I think you were. You say, well, this might be the last time, but you wouldn't show it. To be something to yourself. You'd feel as you're a weakling if you showed fear. If you started to weep or something like that. I didn't find anybody doing that, but you could tell that there was anxiety in the air. What was going to happen after daylight tomorrow?
In September 1917, Harry Patch and his fellow soldiers were making their way back across open ground when a stray shell hit them.
Well, the whiz-bang came over. I saw the flash. You don't hear any sound from it. You simply see the flash. And it must have been the force of the explosion that blew me down. I didn't know I'd been hit until some minutes after. Where I was hit, all the feeling went out. It was as if the nerves were gone, and it was several minutes before the pain came back, and then I could see the blood. They put got a bandage out, put it on it, but the other fellows, they must have been right back where the shell burst, really, and they must have been blown to pieces with it. But they never found anything of them. I should never forget the 3 I lost behind me. That upsets me more than anything.
Harry's war was over. He returned to England to recover. But for Andrew Bowie, the worst was yet to come. The final battle for the village of Passchendaele itself. At 5:20 a.m. on the 12th of October, his battalion launched their assault.
When it came to attack, the whole hell was let loose with the Germans. The shrapnel machine guns playing on us. We hadn't a chance. It was suicides, really. They just blasted it off the earth. Men were dropping all around us.
Andrew lay pinned down in a shell hole. Gunfire and shells exploded around him, and he was lucky to survive. That day, the Allies suffered some 13,000 casualties.
The whole affair seemed to be over in hours. The battalion just wiped out. The actual roll call after the affair was 39 out of over 600, 680 approximately. So many were killed, of course. So many were wounded and couldn't get out, probably die in the mud.
The village of Passchendaele was finally captured by Canadian troops on the 10th of November. By the end of fighting, over 300,000 Allied soldiers had been killed or wounded. Over 40,000 were never found. The Germans had suffered 260,000 casualties. But this was the last of these terrible battles of attrition to be fought in World War I. In the next episode, we find out how close Germany came to winning the war and how the Allies finally seized victory.